well with you. What's your translation, by the way? What are you translating from?
I translate the in-house magazine of Patek Philippe, the very, very, very luxury watchmakers. It's a fun translation. It's pretty much the only one I've got left. I'm basically retired, but I quite enjoy doing that one, so I keep it. But they always send it to me at the last minute, and then it's a terrible rush to get it done.
So what are you translating from and to?
From French into English.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. That's really cool. I just re-upped my subscription to my online French tutorial. So I've got it. I want to get my B2 certification next year, so that just to have it, so I can have it as an independent verification of level. Yeah. Okay, Digby. So thank you so much for joining. You are a ski aficionado. You've been involved with Zermatt in the mountains for years and years, and maybe you can describe a little bit better than I can your background, so that we have context for the conversation.
Yeah, well, so I grew up obviously in Britain, although actually even that's not true, because my father was a soldier. So my earlier childhood, I grew up in Singapore, and then Britain for school, and then just outside London. And then after I'd finished my A-levels, so what you would call high school, I needed to get away from home. I wasn't particularly keen on studying anything straight away, and I had seen skiing on the television. In fact, my aunt had taken me skiing once, and I thought, this is for me. I was rubbish at sport at school, so it was something that I could do, whereas I'd always been picked last for football and things like that. And I got myself a job, a bit of a fluke really, and in a little village called Châteaudet, as a barman and wine waiter at the ripe old age of 19, and went out, and people kept offering me other jobs, and I didn't have any pressing reason to go home, so I stayed. And that was about 74. By 78, I'd been sort of recruited to the ski school because I was not good but extremely cheap. And I worked at my skiing, and I passed my Swiss certification by the skin of my teeth in 1987, and I've basically been ski instructing since the late 70s. And first of all in Châteaudet, I'm sitting now in Lausanne by the lake. Châteaudet is just 50 minutes behind me up in the mountains. So it's still sort of home. It's sort of where I call home, or I live here. And this gets onto the crux of your question. As global warming proceeded from the late 80s, early 90s, it became apparent that low-level resorts like Châteaudet were going to be more and more untenable. And I wasn't going to make any money. I have to say that I wasn't actually ski instructing full-time by then. I was, first of all, I worked for several years for the Red Cross, looking after the refugees. And then I went to university with the idea of school teaching, but landed up instead being offered jobs at the university. So I worked at the university for about 10 years teaching English literature, which was interesting because it overlapped with the skiing. Because romantic poetry, and particularly the expressions of the landscape, was my specialist subject. So, and of course, the mountains and the aesthetic of the sublime, which I suppose is the aesthetic which is properly applicable to the mountains, mean that sport in the mountains, activity in the mountains was an integral part of what I was doing, which was great because then I could take, time off during the semester breaks to go off to research in the mountains. So
I like what you did there, Digby. Yeah. So
so Zermatt was where I chose to go because that was the place where, and it's not very far from here, it's only a couple of hours drive. And it's got the most sublime mountains in the Alps, for sure, possibly anywhere in aesthetic terms. And it was sure of big snow. And I was sure of getting work, which was also fun. I actually like ski instructing. So so that's how I landed up there. And it also, in a way, it's meant that I've been very close to the problem that you're interested in for 50 years, one way or another, both practically and theoretically.
Well, that's brilliant. I mean, you've got quite a perspective. So just to reframe the conversation real quickly, I mean, now that, and the timing is that the Northern Hemisphere ski season is coming to a close, although we just read some articles that said that the US ski season has been extended indefinitely because they keep getting huge dumps of snow. So who knows? But there's been a lot of conversation this season in the press, on the slopes, and around the boardroom, in the boardroom of lots of businesses that are involved with ski, whether they're equipment or apparel and everything in between, suggesting that the sport is becoming unsustainable, increasingly exclusive, and potentially damaging to the environment. So I'm really curious to hear what you think now that there's so much more chatter about it and people are really talking about it. Was it ever thus, or do you think something is fundamentally changing?
Oh, no, it wasn't like that. That wouldn't have been applicable at all in the 1970s, 1980s. There was no discernible climate change. I mean, it's probably going on, but it wasn't affecting ski seasons in the Alps. And I don't think the other two statements would have been true, or at least they certainly wouldn't have been impinging on anybody's consciousness back then. Let me take them one at a time. So the first one was the ski season wasn't sustainable. Yeah, that is becoming the case. I mean, that is why I ski in Zermatt, because there simply isn't a sustainable ski season in Châteaudet, which is, by the way, part of the Gstaad region, which is, so in fact, Châteaudet is a little place, but Gstaad is a large ski area, very upmarket. And we used to have a 5-month ski season, and now we're lucky to have a 5-week ski season. So wow. We're continuing for the moment, but it's getting more and more complicated. Now, as to the second, the question of its availability, I mean, according to wealth or class, yeah, that's definitely becoming a problem, because for not just for the question of climate change. Skiing used to be cheaper, and it used to be cheaper because the installations, ski lifts, pisting, road access, all of that stuff was much simpler. The vast majority of ski lifts were drag lifts of one form or another. A drag lift, you need, I mean, the figures from the Swiss Association of Mountain Railways is that you need 500,000 a year at current prices in turnover to pay for a drag lift. A lifted lift, a carried lift, a lift hanging from a cable, you need 4 times that to pay for. Wow. And now we don't have drag lifts anymore because, well, we're spoiled, I suppose. People moan about having to go up drag lifts, and whereas back in the day, a mountain, single section of a mountain, like I mean something more, a single lift section of a mountain. They'll have other lifts at the top, but it'll have just to give you an order of size, it's difficult, but they maybe have 1 or 2 piece machines, and things would get pieced maybe once a week. Now that same area's got 10 piece machines, and everything gets pieced every night, and much more gets pieced because the machines are much more competent. So anything over 35-40% previously wasn't pieced. which actually for most of us was a great thing because, especially with ski instructors, people really had to learn to ski. Now it's so easy, what you do see is everything's pieced. They use winches to pull the lifts up, to pull the machines up over 30%. So everything's pieced flat and everybody goes everywhere. It's relatively accessible, means that people can ski relatively badly quite fast. The change in ski technology helps that as well. Well, the one thing you do notice is that when it's just skied and the piste cuts up and you start to get bumps in the middle of the day, everybody disappears because nobody knows how to do it anymore. So
you taught me how to do it, so and you've taught plenty of people how to do it, but your point is taken. We're becoming a very soft society, right? So it's kind of like
so yes, I mean, that's another. I mean, the other thing, of course, the other thing which has made it extremely expensive is replacing natural snow with artificial snow. Yeah. Now, you in the States have been doing artificial snow for a lot longer than us here, but from the 1980s onwards, and particularly from the noughties, you start to see snow cannons absolutely everywhere. In Zermatt, the snow cannon system covers hundreds of square miles. I mean, it's absolutely huge, and that's extremely expensive. And that does also have, of course, ecological implications because the take up for water is high and you do need energy. And so you get this sort of circular problem where climate change is reinforcing all of the different things which are bearing down on mountain sports. And I mean, in some ways, skiing has become more accessible because it's easier than it used to be. People don't really take ski lessons anymore. They take ski lessons as kids, or they take a week of ski lesson first time and then they get on with it. Back at the beginning in my day, people took ski lessons for years and years on end. I mean, we used to. There's a famous French comedy film about silly French people going on ski holidays, conforming to all of the French caricatures of that. And there's one moment where a chap is with a ski instructor, and the ski instructor says, "Today we are going to be working on the pole plants." And then he sits on a terrace with a megaphone, tells him when to plant his pole. Well, apart from the terrace and the megaphone, we actually used to do that. There actually was a lesson about pole planting. Now, you cover that in 30 seconds.
But it's more accessible in terms of ability, but it's less accessible in terms of economics.
Absolutely. And as what we see is that the smaller resorts, which are cheaper, which are more accessible to people, especially the local people living in the city, they're the ones that go to the small resorts anyway, but they've got shorter and shorter seasons, so they tend to head up into the big high mountain resorts like everybody else. So you're seeing a lot of pressure on high mountain resorts, which are just fuller and fuller and fuller all the time. And you're seeing the low resorts suffering enormously and losing the high end of their clientele because nobody's going to reserve to go to a place where they're not sure they're going to have the snow, and for which the sort of local clientele is often not there just because there isn't any snow.
So fast forward 10 years, Digby, what do you think the ski season of the Alpine ski season is going to look like?
Well, I think the first thing to say about the Alpine ski season is that the most important change is not during the ski season. Mm-hmm. What you're seeing is all ski resorts diversifying their products to extend as far as possible throughout the year. And one of the other problems of global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it, is that it's getting hotter, at least here in the Alps in the summer, than it was before. We have, here on my terrace overlooking Lake Geneva, we frequently have summertime temperatures for weeks on end above 30 degrees Celsius, which is 90 Fahrenheit. It's really hot. And going down to the actual shore of the Mediterranean, it's even hotter than that. And people need to go places in the summer. They always used to go to the seaside. The Mediterranean holiday, of course, is a vast European institution, even more so than the ski holiday. But less people are going because it's too hot, and more of them are going up into the mountains because you can do stuff in the mountains because, if you go up to up from where I am here, just to 600 meters to Gstaad, it's not so hot in the daytime, and it's cool in the evening. So you sleep better, you can do mountain biking and walking and play tennis and play golf and do all the other things. So I would say that the principal thing that ski resorts are doing to deal with the problem of climate change is extending their seasons as far as they can into the spring and the summer, doing other things. And in fact, in Châteaudet, where we're trying to relaunch our lift company, which basically went bust 5 years ago, the installations are still there, but we're not running them. We're trying to raise money from government and private sources with a business plan which stresses that the winter season is unnecessary and redundant to our profit margin. So that if we get a half decent winter, well, that'll be, as the French like to say, butter on the spinach. But the plan for viability it relies only on the other seasons, the spring and summer seasons. And if you can break even on your profit margin for the spring and summer, then it doesn't really matter what happens in the winter. What's important is to have those installations in place. It's probably not quite the same thing for, not everybody can do it. It's going to be, Zermatt does it very well because Zermatt has the Matterhorn and the tradition of mountain climbing and the great restaurants and the beautiful village. It's more difficult for places like Tignes, which is, even in the winter, the locals call the crater. So not the prettiest place on earth in the summer, less likely, but even so, they're still doing it for sure. They're still trying to find ways of extending the season. There was always a summer season anyway, but they're trying to find ways of bringing more people back in the summer.
So I think in apparel, we're really definitely talking about versatility is much more important now than it ever used to be before. You could talk about specialization and being technically competent so that the product will serve any need up on the mountain. But now that versatility and needs to serve various seasons as well. And
absolutely. Well, you see, it's not just the resorts, by the way. You look at the website of any skiing equipment manufacturer, skis or clothing, they've all diversified. They all have, mountain bike stuff and summer wear and, that as well as I do. So everybody knows that this is coming. And your sports shop in the resort used to be just a ski shop and were pretty much closed in the summer. Now they're renting mountain bikes and selling tennis rackets and swimwear and goodness knows what else. I mean, my imagination is not what it was, but that's what's happening now. That's part of the answer. I mean, it doesn't really answer the more profound philosophical question, because I think it is a philosophical question. I mean, it's a pragmatic side to it. Can skiing in the mountains remain economically viable, first of all, because that's the first question. If it becomes just too expensive to run it, then it's not going to happen. Places go bust and it stops. But of course, there's also the ecological dimension, which makes it philosophical. Will it be morally defensible to go on skiing? And actually, I'm quite sanguine about that. I mean, that was what my PhD was about. I think you have to make a distinction between what is an aesthetic position. People say, oh, we've got the snow cannons and piste machines. They're horrible. They look ugly. Well, that's a matter of opinion. It's not a moral position, and people confuse the two sides of it. We can't do this because it's causing species dieback, or we can't do this because it's causing global warming. Is one thing. Those are statements in an area which can be factually verified and proved or disproved. So that's science. And you can make those statements, but you can't roll into the same sentence. We can't do this because it's bad for the environment, and we can't do this because those pylons are an offense against my sensibility of what the landscape should look like. that is, I mean, it may very well be offence against your sensibility. That's fine, but that's not an argument. Because
And are you hearing that a lot, Digby? Do you hear that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have an editorial from The Guardian 15 years ago where the editorialist did exactly that, rolled in aesthetic objections to scientific objections in the same sentence.
Wow.
People find that obvious. As soon as you feel that you're on the right side of the moral argument, all your prejudices can be expressed as proof. Actually, you only have to look at politics in your country and mine at the moment to see how that works, can't you?
Not my country, not my country.
Oh, that's true. Of course, I'm ever so sorry.
Always make that mistake, and it's not
very important. Yeah, well, you live next door to them, so possibly even worse. You need to build a wall.
I don't. I live across the ocean now, so
I know you do. I know you do, but I mean your original real country. They need to build a wall. But plus, you live in Britain, so we're almost as bad anyway. I'm glad to live in Switzerland myself.
well, there you go.
Yeah,
Well,
so it's a complex area. I think, I mean, and I have taught courses on landscape to training ski instructors. And I think that if you're making a new development or maintaining a development, you need to make a cost-benefit accounting where the benefit is the economic input to the community which is gained, and the cost is the ecological downside.
mhm.
And because people's livelihoods depend on these things. Now, there are mountain villages where you take out the tourism and there's not much else left. So you're talking about engineering a pretty vast societal change. If you take it away, people have to move down to the city. I mean, that is happening, by the way. In all mountain resorts, it's harder and harder for the local kids to stay in the villages for one reason or another. But certainly the tourism.
But even if the resorts are becoming much more year round.
Yeah, of course. So yes, I mean the big resorts that are managing to maintain their cash flow and keep up the number of hotels and all the rest of it. Yeah, there's work there. And there's all sorts of work. That's the problem. There's work in these resorts because the farming community still farms.
Yep.
But it farms differently. The farms are getting bigger and the number of people necessary to work the farms are getting smaller. I mean, this is obviously, you know, that's what happens with farming, but in mountain farming, it's particularly difficult to consolidate, but it is happening. And then everybody else, I mean, if there's no tourist industry, then all the other industries which are based, so the building industry, the services industries, all disappear too. And so Châteaudet not only can no longer maintain its ski lifts, but we have virtually no hotels anymore. When I first went there 50 years ago, there were maybe 50 hotels. Now there's one. Yeah.
That's a real shame. Well, I really hope that that the appeal is successful and that the business case proves successful for you guys to reinstate.
Well, I'm fortunately no longer involved in it. I used to be for years. It was like pushing water uphill. So I'm left that to a younger generation, but they're doing a pretty good job. We're hopeful.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks so much, Digby. I really appreciate your time and I always appreciate your wise counsel on the slopes and your sparkling company off the slopes.
That is very kind indeed.
And appreciate
it's absolutely beautiful. We'll see you soon. Bye, Gabi.
Okay, hang on.
Bye.